It's amazing. I get to spend the day listening to interesting conversation, and then I get the rock star introduction. All I'm going to do today is thank you. Thank you for joining us now for the roundup and what I expect to be the most exciting talk of the week. And thank you to those of you who've been with us all day today. And I know I've heard of you saying it's been an incredible week. A lot of familiar faces, a lot of new faces, a lot of learning, a lot of conversation, and it's coming to an end and everyone is tired, but everyone is maintaining high energy, which is fantastic to see. So for those of you who haven't been with us all day, this has been a day of synthesis, as we promised. We started with a roundup of the industry challenge. We saw a couple of young companies telling us the story of how they collaborated with Swift and some of the older companies, not just to apply their technology to doing things we used to do faster, but to look at how they can solve problems differently. And that, alongside collaboration, have been the weaving threads of the day, because soon after the challenge, we moved to the platform conversation. We started talking about future-proofing. Now, those of you who are in the room know that the conversation was complex, deep, engaged, and it can't be easily summarized. But we can say that for all of us who stayed with it, there were three very interesting takeaways. An agreement across all of our panelists that what we're looking at in future is the battle for talent. And not only that the people with the best engineers will get hold of the future and make it their own, but actually that the developer experience, the engineer experience is something that banks have to start thinking towards. Because as you open your infrastructure to the developer community, they are a new kind of customer. We heard traditional banking organizations saying that they envisage themselves becoming algorithmic businesses and that they are aligning all their creative efforts towards that. We also heard that the startups in the room had no idea what the problem looked like. And it's an interesting challenge that we might have to come back to in years to come to see how long it takes until future-proofing becomes a challenge, even for our youngest challengers in the space that have technology in their DNA. Immediately after that session, we moved on to looking at fintech hubs. We've done the world tour this year, and the APAC community got to be last but not least. In fact, they firmly believe that they hold the key to the future, the key to the best developers, the best talent, the most aggressive application of that technology to solving problems. And they pretty much told us to watch this space and watch their technology and their ideas and their companies coming back towards us to ignite debate and create new energy in our markets. After that, with almost no break, we moved on to what Kevin called the cheat sheet session. So if you weren't here, find someone who was. Because we had rapporteurs who had spent the entire week going to various sessions, following not the theme of the session necessarily, but the two threads that we knew from last year would be on everyone's agenda: distributed ledgers and cybersecurity. Weaving them with each other, but actually also giving us the summary of what has been said, but also the summary of what has not been said, and in some ways throwing down the gauntlet of what they expect us as a community to engage better and more on as time goes by. We have been challenged to produce real industrial production instances of DLT solutions and get the POCs out of the lab. We have been challenged to think and act more like a community when it comes to cybersecurity, not just to capturing the information, but actually leveraging the technology we have spent the day and the week talking about in order to actually get smarter about what we do and how we do it. It's been an amazing week. It's been an amazing day. I have high expectations that what is coming next will be better still. But for now, a huge thank you from me, and I'll hand you over to Kevin for a roundup of the week as we're coming close to the end.
Thank you, Lida. Now, when Lida talks about high expectations for what's coming next, she doesn't mean me. I'm going to introduce you to somebody very shortly. But before we get there, I've been given the great privilege and pleasure to not just wrap up a day as Lida's done and our other anchors have done, but to try and wrap up this whole week. For those of you who've been with us for the week, we've covered everything. We've covered everything from disruption redefined all the way through. This is only 2 days. Okay. This is only wow. Okay, so we've covered everything this week from disruption redefined all the way through to platforms. We've touched on modern organization, we've touched on man-machine convergence, and as Leader said, today has been all about platforms. The journey we've taken you on from this little cocoon on the Sibos floor has been immense. Everything we've done has been filmed, so everything will be made available afterwards. But this was your week. The sessions we've had in, the speakers we've had in, have been truly inspiring. The coffee we've drunk has kept the energy up, and the music that we've been playing has been keeping everybody awake. I'm not going to try and cover any of this in any detail at all, but this week, this is my personal take on it, has been absolutely amazing. Now, I'm not going to thank everybody, although I should do, but because there's still more to come. And on that more to come, I'm now going to introduce you to the head of Innotribe, the man who pulls some of these strings, sets us off in the right direction, and then gives us enough rope that we can go and pull this off. Ladies and gentlemen, the head of Innotribe, Fabian van den Rijt. I'll fill in. Come on, come on, come on, come on. Here's the dance leader. You're missing it. Fabian?
I'm not going to dance.
Oh, come on, please.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you.
Good. I hope you're as tired and excited that I am. And I always like this background. So the little story, when we were in Singapore last year, we wanted a background that was inspiring calm, and it was a fear of missing out on DLT. So those friends there at the right, well, we'll thank them later on, suggested this calm. So I'm going to, normally I speak very loudly, so I'm trying to slow my pace. So I have humble learnings. I was given 1 minute or so. And maybe that's what I took from this Sibos. Innovation is the business. Innovation is not a PR afterthought, like it used to be maybe in some conferences in the past. But innovation is not only about bringing new products. Innovation is also to defend this industry in innovative ways. And we've seen that when there was DLT and cyber being discussed. Now, this place, this cocoon, is a place where we can talk to each other and reflect on innovation. I have 2 words. Our chairman, Yawarsha, normally has 3, but he's the chairman, I'm just the head of Innotribe, so I have 2 words. The first one is silos are not an option anymore. We have thinking silos, which leads to organizational silos. We even have buzzword silos, fintech, regtech, whatever tech. That is not good. Silos is not the way you innovate. Which leads me to my second word, which is architecture. I'm privileged to have a daughter which is in her 3rd year architecture. That's the most marvelous job on earth. So what this industry needs, on top of security architects, which we really need, and IT architects, we need 3 types of architects. People who actually can design business models, architect business models, because adoption of new technology is about new business models and how they work with existing business models. We need regulatory context architects, people from the public sector and private sector who can understand how to best framework and support innovation. And we need process and data architects. So I know I'm already too long. So 2 words from me you need to remember: silo, not an option, and let's have more architects in our firms and our universities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fabian. Silos, not an option. That's 4. You're 1 up on Yawa. So, it is my great pleasure and privilege to introduce our closing speaker for today. When Peter enthused for months about this guy, he kept on coming back to one thing. He said, this guy is going to blow your socks off. And I truly believe he is. He's going to blow this whole forest apart, and he's going to lay some truths together. Am I building you up too much? Douglas Rushkoff is going to come up here, and he's going to talk to you about the sharing economy, from what I understand. But he's going to call BS on it. He's going to talk to you really about platform cooperativism and where its role is in the future. I'm humbled, honored, and pleased to welcome up onto the stage to give your closing keynote for Innotribe this year. Ladies and gentlemen, Douglas Rushkoff.
Thanks. Thanks. You're a sweetie pie. So we got a lot of ground to cover. So I'll get right to it. There's really two kinds of digital disruption. There's what most people here are talking about, which is traditional capitalism on digital steroids. And then there's true digital distributism. And for the most part, these two models are incompatible. You know, you can either grow your bank or grow your market. And they're really not the same thing. You know, peer-to-peer fintech is incompatible with monopoly. So when you say, oh, we're getting a big share of that peer-to-peer fintech, that's insane. You don't own peer-to-peer finance. That's the whole point. So we can take these technologies and use them to accelerate and amplify the problems of traditional corporate capitalism. That's it. I disappeared for a second. Or we can begin to look at how can we make a transition. You know, in some sense, forward compatibility is impossible because we can't make what's happening now compatible with what's been going on for the last couple of centuries. But we can retrieve some earlier mechanisms, and that's what I want to look at. We can retrieve some earlier mechanisms and renew them in a new digital context and get a very new economy. You know, when I realized this, when this all became clear to me was in November of 2013, when the title event of this book happened. I woke up in the morning and saw some messages in my Twitter feed talking about people were throwing rocks at the Google buses in Oakland. And would I cheer it? Would I retweet and celebrate this was happening? And I couldn't bring myself to celebrate that people were throwing rocks at a Google bus. I know Google programmers, they're my friends. I can't applaud what's happening, but I can understand the sentiment behind throwing rocks at the Google bus. You know, for people who live in San Francisco and Oakland, in the cool areas, their rents doubled, tripled, quadrupled in the time that Google developers moved into their neighborhoods. And here they were, not even participating in their neighborhoods, but being transported in and out as if they were going back to the mothership in Mountain View and then to the neighborhood. So they were having an extractive negative effect on the real world. And they were using public bus stops to transport their workers on these private double-decker air-conditioned buses. So I understand that resentment from a very practical place. People could no longer afford to live in San Francisco. Developers were moving to San Francisco because it was cool, but the people who had made it cool couldn't afford to live there and were leaving. If you want to go see what New York was like in the 1980s, go to San Francisco today. It's that gecko fever. And Google were supposed to be the good guys. Those of us who were around in the early internet, we remember when Google was two kids in a Stanford dorm room who were taking down Yahoo. You know, and Yahoo was the big bad guys at that point. And Yahoo was organizing the net how? They were organizing the net's information from the top down. Yahoo was a search engine that worked a bit like a table of contents. There's this category and that one. They would organize the world's data. And here these two kids in Stanford, what were they doing? they were doing the informational equivalent of the blockchain. They were going to use all of the links that people were making to one another for a bottom-up index of the internet, a people's index. And then what did they do? Well, unfortunately, they took a little bit too much money, and then they had to repay that money, so they got on the growth bandwagon. And because they had to grow, they did. And they used digital technology to grow, and they became the biggest, baddest company on the block. Right around the time people were throwing rocks at the Google bus was when their arrangement with the National Security Administration was revealed, and that they were looking at people's accounts, and oh my gosh. And Google got so big, they could no longer even grow organically as a technology company. What is Google now? Google's not Google. Google is Alphabet. And what is Alphabet? Alphabet is a holding company. Google makes its money as Alphabet, not by developing new technologies, but by buying and selling technology companies. They may as well be a bank. Because in the operating system that we're using, the only ones who finally make money are the banks. That's what Jack Welch realized in the 1990s, the CEO of GE. He realized he made more money lending money to someone to buy a washing machine than he did selling the washing machine. So he sold off his what's called productive assets, those bad industrial companies, and became a finance firm until around 2007 when the finance firms all broke and he realized they didn't actually have the expertise of banking, and well, that's another story. But for Google to do this, for Google, the quintessential little tech company by kids to turn into that was emblematic of what happened to the internet. See, those of us who were around in the late 80s and early 90s, we thought of the internet as the thing that was going to bring down the yuppie scum, as we called them at the time. That this was going to be the slacker revolution. We'd get to work at home in our underwear, in our own time, in a peer-to-peer economy, selling things that we handcraft, like Etsy. It would be one big Burning Man festival. And then along came Wired magazine, which reframed, it recontextualized the internet as the salvation of the NASDAQ stock exchange. You know, so this is Burning Man, actually. This Burning Man vision of the internet was exchanged for the internet as the salvation of NASDAQ. You know, NASDAQ had crashed in 1987 with the biotech boom and bust. Everyone thought, this is it. The way they did in 2007, is this it? They thought in the late 80s, this is it. But Wired magazine came and said, don't worry. The internet will create new surface area on the marketplace. We'll have an infinite surface area. As long as we can really draw more attention out of people, more eyeball hours out of people, growth will be infinite. And then the race was on. So VC came in. That's what Wired basically said. Come in, guys. The water's fine. This is safe. It's going to grow. So a young person comes up with a new idea, a developer. Let's say, oh, I'm going to make an app that lets people send the equivalent of text messages, but to anyone, in any subscriber. Isn't that a great idea? Yeah, kid, that's a great idea. Here's some VC. And the day I saw my friend, well, I guess former friend now, he doesn't answer my emails, my friend Evan Williams, on the cover of the Wall Street Journal, he's a co-founder of Twitter, with the number $4.3 billion under his face. On the one hand, I was happy because my friend's a billionaire, but on the other hand, I was thinking, this guy is fucked. And he was, because once you take $4.3 billion, how do you grow? How do you do 100x on that? How do you do 1,000x on that? You can't. You know, Twitter makes in revenue $2 billion a year off a 140-character messaging app that costs very little to maintain. But it's considered an abject failure by Wall Street. Why? Because it turns out $2 billion is about all you can make off a 140-character messaging app. That's its status quo. That's its equal. Oh, sorry, you lose, kid. Now, my grandmother would be very happy if I came up with a 140-character messaging app and made $2 billion a year, wouldn't? But the investors aren't, because they need 100x, they need 1,000x. The investor comes in. What is a VC, really? A VC is the person who tells the young developer how to pivot. That's the Silicon Valley term, pivot. What pivot means is how to abandon your original great idea and do something that will allow you to sell the stock to someone else. Right? The product of most venture capital-backed digital companies is not the product. The real product are the shares. You don't want to show revenue. You don't want to do anything real. You want to get out. It's the exit strategy is the only moment that matters. So I set on a journey to figure out, why is this happening? Why are all of these developers who are so aware of Linux and Python and every operating system under the sun, why are they completely oblivious to the economic operating system on which they're running their companies? They're accepting it as if it were a precondition of nature. And it's not. It's one way of doing business that was invented at a particular moment in history by people who have long since left the building. You know, and this is what I went on a 10-year journey. I became a PhD in digital economics and now a professor, to figure out what happened. And it's really simple. I mean, people in Europe should know about it better than we Americans. We are running a 21st century digital economy on a 12th and 13th century printing press era economic operating system that was developed by the proto-early monarchs of Europe to prevent the rise of the middle class. It's not even Marxism. This is just fact. You don't have to go to Marx to get this. Just read the charters, look at the history, read my book. Pay for it. If you can. If you can't, it's okay. Just get it from the library. So what I found out was, in the late Middle Ages, when the soldiers came back from the Crusades, they came back with both financial and technological innovations that changed Europe. You know, new ways of grinding grain and growing things. But the big innovation they came back with was an Arab business structure called the bazaar. And they brought the bazaar to Europe, and we called it the market. And on 2 or 3 days a week, people would gather at the market and trade goods and services. They started with barter. Barter didn't work, so they developed really innovative daily market-based currencies, almost like the chips you use in a card game, that you launch the currencies in the morning and they expire in the evening. These were currencies that, read about them because you can get great ideas from them. These were currencies that were optimized to promote transactions, to prime the pump of transaction in the morning, and then they were done. You couldn't save them. You couldn't accumulate them. Gold was too precious to use in a market. You're not going to buy a chicken with gold, right? So you had these market receipts that weren't worth anything in the long term. And people got wealthy. You saw the greatest period of economic growth, distributed economic growth, at the end of the Middle Ages. This is when they built the cathedrals, because they didn't have money that they could put into a bank and save long term. They built cathedrals as an investment in the future. It wasn't the Pope writing a check to build a cathedral. Who knew? So the aristocracy was upset about this. They had had 1,000 years of feudalism, and now there's the rising middle class, the rising burghers, or bourgeois, as we call them. So they came up with 2 ideas to prevent the rise of the middle class. Right? The first was the chartered monopoly. The chartered monopoly meant that if you were a little shoemaker, you can't be a little shoemaker anymore. You have to go work for His Majesty's Royal Chartered Shoe Company. So it was a restriction on small business. So now, instead of creating and selling value, now you sold your time, right, as an employee. This is when wage labor was born. People hadn't worked over time since slavery. And now they were working for time. It's when they put the clock tower up in the middle of every town, because now everything was adjudicated by time. Time is money. And the second innovation they came up with was central currency. They made all of the local currencies illegal. Sometimes they had to send like the Knights Templar in to kill people who were trying to use it. They did it on religious grounds. They said if it didn't have the king on the coin or on the bill, then it wasn't official, but nobody else was allowed to put the king on but the king. So central currency was a great idea because what it did was allowed the wealthy to get wealthy simply by having money. Right? If you wanted to transact, now you had to borrow money from the central treasury at interest. And as we all in banking know, this means you need an economy that grows, because if you borrow $100, you've got to pay back $200 in 5 years. Where does the other $100 come from? The economy grows. So growth is built into the operating system of the economy. We have an economy, it's a sort of a wag the tail feature. Now this was fine for the colonial powers of Western Europe because there was a whole planet to grow. There were all of these people, well, to enslave really, and all these places from which to extract value. And that really worked for a good long time, right up until really the end of colonialism, until Eisenhower's time. And it's the model that most corporations used right up till now. You know, you look at a company in America, say like Walmart. You have them here, Walmart? Are they in Switzerland? Probably not. But you understand the Walmart model is not to create a sustainable economic relationship with the towns where it settles. Walmart is a colonial empire. So Walmart goes to a community, it sells its goods below cost because it has capital, sells its goods below cost to put all of the local merchants out of business. Then if anyone wants a job now, they have to work for Walmart. Once Walmart's the only employer, they can hire everybody part-time so they don't get benefits, and now they need to get their health care and social services from the community or from the government, and they do that until the economy is gone. They do, it's like more like a vacuum cleaner, and then when it's done, Walmart will close that store and move to another region and begin sucking again. And it's a short-term model, but it takes maybe, 20 years for a Walmart to put a local economy out of business. Amazon, Uber, these kind of companies are working a lot faster. You know, then you can see, instead of 20 years, you can see things like this happen in 20 months. Now, technology was supposed to be the answer to the end of colonialism. It was Eisenhower's advisors, these guys, Vannevar Bush and the folks that we read as the early internet pioneers, they were writing to Eisenhower saying, all of these computer war technologies that we use to decipher Nazi messages, these can actually save our economy in a post-industrial age. Now that we can't grow, now that there's no physical territory in which to expand, technology can create virtual territory for marketplaces. It was a brilliant idea. So they basically had two ways to grow the economy with technology. The first is there's more surface area so there can be more consumption. Because now we can purchase virtual goods, things that aren't even real. Now we can spend money with our time, with our attention, with video games. So you don't need more territory for that. There's infinite real estate online. And the second is automation. With automation, we can cut costs. But think about how automation really works. Automation works by replacing humans with machines. And we could say, oh, this is good because it costs less, but does it really cost less? The first computer most of us interacted with was the telephone receptionist. I remember when they replaced the telephone receptionist at a company I worked at, she was pretty, with a robo-answerer. Now think about your experience when you call the robo-answerer, the automatic, efficient answering thing. You start pushing these buttons and menus. It takes you more time to deal with the computer receptionist than the real one. But it takes the company less money. So what have they done? This is classic economics. They've externalized the cost of the receptionist to everyone that interacts with the company. But there's more total work going on. We are all spending more as this company spends less. So what is our choice? We have to put in a robo one also. So it becomes an arms race where we use it and they use it and they use it. If you don't use it, then you're absorbing the costs that no one else is. So we end up with an ultimately a less efficient communication space, offering less employment opportunities for real people, all in the name of externalizing costs to someone else. So both of these impacts of using technology to save traditional colonial corporate capitalism, both of them are dehumanizing. It's either dehumanizing to labor or dehumanizing to the consumer. But the object of the game with digital companies is pure and simple monopoly. That's what they're for. I mean, think about Amazon, one of the great examples of a digital company. They're successful, right? What did Amazon pick as its first industry to go into? Books. Now, is that because Jeff Bezos loves books and wanted to help authors like me reach more people and publishers become more articulated in the book? No, he picked books because books was a struggling, awful, non-growth, inefficient industry. We've been struggling along for 300 or 400 years. Do you think people want to read books? My God, especially now, it is not a growth industry. He bought it because it's the low-hanging fruit. It was an easy place to establish a monopoly, which is what he did. He established a monopoly in books in order to do what? Leverage that monopoly into another industry and another one and another one. So you leverage your platform monopoly in books to do retail. Your platform monopoly in retail, now what does he want to do? He wants to replace UPS and the post office and FedEx. That's the new area. But he has enough leverage in this platform monopoly to go get that one. What is Uber doing? Does Uber really want to help cab drivers and taxi? Of course not. Uber's establishing a monopoly in taxis, another low-hanging fruit, miserable, inefficient industry. Not because he wants to make it better, but because he can establish a monopoly and then move into something else. The problem is these inflated assets, by the way these digital companies work, end up affecting everybody else. This way of doing business, this rapid growth, this need for monopoly ends up accelerating the entire marketplace and changing the behavior of every player. Either you play along or you get run over. I mean, poor Wells Fargo, right? Why was Wells Fargo doing that? Why did they decide they need 8 accounts for every customer and do whatever you have to get more? Because they had to grow faster than a bank should have to grow. And they were trying to do it, what, in a flat US economy. What happens if an economy is flat? How is a bank supposed to grow? A bank can't grow if the economy is flat. But how is a bank supposed to grow? By extracting more value from who's already there. And the only reason they need to do that is because how is their share price going to compete against an Amazon or an Uber or a Twitter or one of these companies that's growing astronomically through this synthetic expansion? And while all this expansion is going on, the humans are becoming depleted. The humans have less time. We have less energy. We suffer. I mean, anybody who studied economics understands the 3 factors of production are what? Land, labor, and capital. Remember when we got taught that in Economics 101? Land, labor, and capital. Right now, capital is the only one with a seat at the table. When capital comes into a digital company, they get to decide what happens. What about the land, the place where Uber drives? What about the labor, the drivers of Uber? They don't have a voice. So what happens when capital has the only voice and land and labor have none? Well, look at land. We destroy the planet. Look at labor. They're utterly disenfranchised and throwing rocks at the Google bus. That's not the relationship you want to have with people. Meanwhile, this extractive model has reached its point of diminishing returns. John Hagel of Deloitte, the Deloitte Center for the Edge, he did a great study in 2011 called the Shift Index. And what the Shift Index showed, and I learned about it from Peter, what the Shift Index showed was that corporate profit over corporate size has been going down for 75 years. Corporate profit over size. What does that mean? It means corporations are really good at taking all the poker chips off the table, but really bad at deploying those assets once they have them. So they're stuck in a cycle of obesity where they get big, but they don't have muscle to actually do anything. And when you take all the chips off the table, when you suck all the money out of the marketplace, what happens to the marketplace? Right? You kill it. So right now, most people working in the digital economy space are looking at how can I write software that will convert working assets into static capital, into share price. That's what the apps on your phone are doing, converting working money into share price. And once it's stuck in the shares, it's stuck. You know, meanwhile, everybody's talking about regulation and tax. We have a tax system that encourages this. In America, anyway, dividends, revenue are taxed high, and capital gains are taxed low. So if you want to make money, what are you going to do? You're going to do capital gains. And what are capital gains? Capital gains are extraction into share price. And everybody sees this happening, and everybody knows it's a crisis, so what do? They throw digital steroids on the fire here, to mix a metaphor. They run these traditional programs on digital steroids, hoping that this is somehow going to affect, this is going to give me new growth, right? You can grow by exercising. I'm not saying growth is bad. Growth that's related to the market in which you're operating is great. Look, people are buying stuff, happy, building. Growth by steroids, growth by extraction is temporary and unhealthy. So what do? What's going on here is the financialization of digital technology. So we make derivatives. Yay, derivatives. If you're not making money fast enough just owning a stock, let's compress all that time so I can buy that stock 30 days in the future. That's not enough. Well, I can buy that derivative 30 days in the future and that derivative 30 days in the future. They're not derivatives, they're actually integrals. And what happens when we do that? We end up, in America anyway, the New York Stock Exchange was purchased by its derivatives exchange. Do you understand what that means? The stock market was purchased by its own abstraction. And the stock market was already an abstraction of the market, which was already an abstraction of people's goods and services and needs. That's the digital mentality. See, she agrees. Yeah. We won't leave. So sit in. Or we use algorithms on the stock market. Talk to a trader about algorithms and how it feels that every trade they try to make is short-circuited by an ultra-fast algorithm that's undermining what they're doing. Algorithms are not there to help distribute capital to the enterprises that need capitalization. Algorithms are there to do what? To extract value from the marketplace itself. Algorithms are doing to the stock market what the stock market is doing to the market, what the market is doing to reality. And now we're going to go for another round. Can we get one more abstraction out of this before the end of time? Well, Bitcoin, yay! You know, and when the people have no money left, when the actual humans and places have nothing left, what do? Well, we can't get any money from them, but we can get some data from them. Right? If you have no money to spend, at least you have good, valuable data. So we'll stick data tracking and everything. Jay-Z, the American musician, Jay-Z couldn't find customers for his albums because the kids don't have any money to spend. So what did he do? He made a deal with Samsung to give away an album to all the kids on Samsung Android devices. But what was that album? That album was spyware. Looking at every little thing that gave access to GPS and this and that, so that you see, at least we know what the kids are doing, even if they don't have any cash to spend with us. And every digital company I know, even banking ones that are sort of shaky on the actual revenue model, they all say, oh, don't worry, there's a data play in this. Don't worry, there's data. Oh, look at all the data that we're collecting. That's going to be valuable. There is a data bubble going on, if ever there was one. I mean, data is a subset of marketing and advertising, right? It's market research. Marketing and advertising and branding has never accounted for more than 3 to 4% of GDP. Never. It's riding right at that peak right now. The reason it can't is because you can't have more than a certain amount of the economy taken up by advertising, because then there's no one left to advertise. You know, it's like with me, when they say, oh, do a talk for free because it'll sell some books, or write your book for free because it'll sell some talks. You need someone left who's actually selling something to advertise. You know, but meanwhile, with all of these spins, all of this digital steroidal activity, what it actually does is it makes companies brittle. It makes them less responsive because they're more and more disconnected from the organic marketplace that they should be responding to. You end up, business, banking, money, everyone ends up subjected to the same power law dynamics that make it so there's one Britney Spears and 1 billion people who sell no records at all. You understand that phenomenon, right? How we thought it would create more access, everybody could go online and upload tunes, but actually fewer people are making more money with music and everything. So what's the real digital answer? The real digital answer is, instead of doing forward compatibility of corporate extractive capitalism, what we do is retrieval of the things we left behind. We don't go back to the Middle Ages, although this is pretty Middle Agey, isn't it? You don't go back, you go forward. Burning Man is actually futuristic as much as it is medieval. I mean, look at the steampunk vibe of these worlds. They're not hearkening back so much as retrieving forward. So we move from extractive models to velocity-based models. Or an easier way to think of it is, how do you make money not by growth, but by flow? And that's about encouraging the velocity of money. And it's turning the banking industry from monopoly access to capital, which is what banking is dependent on. It's monopoly access to capital, and instead moving into the space of expertise in transaction, actually providing a service. I know that's hard. You know, so I have 7 little hints. Hey, Amber. I have 7 hints on how you can do that. 1, the mantra for any business at all, but certainly for a bank, should be make them rich. Is the thing we're about to do with our customers going to make them richer or poorer? If it's going to make them poorer, that's bad business, because they're the people on whose money you're depending. Make your suppliers rich, make your partners rich, make everybody in your ecosystem rich. You know, for businesses, number 2 would be strive for the steady state. Figure out a way your business could survive in a steady state if it stopped growing for a minute. Don't be so addicted or dependent on your debt structure or what would the good word be? Don't be required to answer to a debt structure. Your debt structure is less important than your actual market. If you're trying to grow at your rate of debt, you're screwed from the beginning, because then you don't get to grow at the rate of your market. But that would mean, if you're a big company, move from growth to dividends. Make that case to your shareholders. It's a tough one. Pay them to be happy with a company that's at a certain level of a certain size level. You know, in the digital space, it's companies like Pando Daily, it's a publication, that wouldn't take VC. They're like, we're doing fine. It's so funny, in digital land, they call this bootstrapping as if it's an amazing, Baron von Munchausen fantasy. No, bootstrapping is the more normal, real, grounded way to do business. You make some profit, you take that profit, put it in the business, and let the business grow. It's relaxing, it's beautiful. And then you pivot with your market. You know, I was at a shareholder meeting of one of the top 50 companies in America, a soft drink manufacturer who shall remain nameless, but yes, that one. And they were chanting, with the CEO, they were chanting their growth target for the year. 5.2, 5.2, 5.2. And I got up there to do my talk, and I was like, Jesus, if you guys are one of the biggest companies in the known universe, and you have to grow, then what hope is there for any of us? They have to grow. The planet's only so big. People can only drink so much of that. God. Number 4, rather than talk about turning your whole company on a dime, right? If you're working at Chase or something, you can't say, oh, let's become a steady state company. What you can do is do little experiments, little trials of things. Oh, it's just, a marketing experiment, or we'll just do a little thing in a little place. So in other words, do little trials of things that so prove themselves that more and more of the company wants to start working that way. So it would be a little thing, like let's say a bank did an experiment where in one town, the bank decided that when a local merchant comes to them for a loan, they'll give them half the loan in cash, dependent on their ability to crowdfund the other half of the loan from their community. So Joe's Pizza wants to build a second dining room and a new ladies' room. Right? They need $100,000. You say, we'll give you $50,000 of that loan if, using this beautiful app that we've made for you, you can crowdsource the other $50,000 from your customers. And how would that work? If a customer gives you $100 towards the new bathroom or a new facility, then you'll give them $120 worth of food once it's open. So the customer's making 20% on their money. The bank is getting a much better collateral than the credit worthiness of the borrower. And the bank is changing its role in the community from the extractor of interest to the facilitator of local economic development. Which gets to my number 5, which is consider bounded economic activity. Everybody, especially when they're talking about Bitcoin, everybody gets universal with everything. Every market's a global market. Everything's international. Consider how to circulate money locally. I got this lesson from the steelworkers in America, the Steelworkers Union. During the economic crisis of 2007, they were looking for ways to invest their money, their retirement money, because the stock market tanked. So what they did, instead of putting their money in stocks, was they invested their retirement money in construction projects that hired steelworkers. It's so clever, it sounds almost illegal, right? So here they invest in something and they get the money right back as salary. They double dipped. Then they triple dipped. They invested in projects that hired steelworkers that were building retirement communities for the steelworkers' parents. So they're triple dipping, and that's by thinking of investment as bounded. In other words, rather than taking $10 out of the economy, think about how can I earn the same dollar 10 times? Right? Then you get a velocity-based, superfluid economy rather than an extractive corporate capital economy on digital steroids. And finally, number 7 is currencies. Local currencies. Local currencies look more like that bank lending idea than they do like Bitcoin. I mean, Bitcoin, God bless, it's a really cute idea. Right? But what is Bitcoin solving for? It's an anonymous cryptocurrency. It's an anonymous cryptocurrency. What is Bitcoin doing? Is Bitcoin engendering trust between people? No, Bitcoin is simply substituting for trust in a new way. So instead of having a central authority to create trust, now we have a bunch of gamers with using up way too much electricity in their processors. It's just a new legacy and a new set of legacy problems. When I hear some of this stuff about Bitcoin here, I mean, the Bitcoin as the true P2P fintech solution, when it's described by banks that we're going to create a private blockchain. A private blockchain is to the Bitcoin public ledger the way Prozac is to LSD. One, the LSD, is about rapid cultural transformation. The other is about control. Right? Take Prozac so you get quiet and just comply. Now, I'm not looking towards a digital revolution here. What I'm looking at is the possibility for a digital renaissance. And a digital renaissance is more exciting. It's a little bit less violent. But what is a renaissance? It's a rebirth of old ideas in a new context. The original Renaissance was the rebirth of Greek and Roman ideas in the context of late medieval Europe. And now what I'm looking at is the rebirth of the ideas that were repressed in the original Renaissance in our digital Renaissance. The things that we left behind. And there's a lot of evidence that we're in a renaissance. The original Renaissance, they circumnavigated the globe. We orbited the globe. The original Renaissance had perspective. We got fractals. The original Renaissance had Gutenberg, and we have the internet. This really is a Renaissance moment, a leap in our ability to experience dimension and perspective. But what we have to retrieve is the humanism that was actually repressed in the original Renaissance. Is the people. Think, what does digital mean? These are the digits. This was digital. So what are we retrieving? We're retrieving hands-on productive capability of human beings. I'm on team human, not team singularity here. This is not about building machines that can replace humanity. It's about building machines that can augment humanity, that can assist humanity, that can restore, at this point, humanity. How do you enable value creation and exchange rather than extracting utility value with dangerously powerful new machines? What I'm asking that we do is use digital technology to, not to optimize human beings for an obsolete market model, but to use digital technology to optimize that market for humanity. Okay, thank you very much. And now, it's my pleasure to introduce Fabian. Thanks. Thank you.
So I don't want you to miss the closing plenary, so I'm talking about humans now. I'm going to thank the people who made this, and not the machine, but maybe the machine as well, but the people who operate those machines who made all this possible. And it's a big team, so at the end you will see a credits like in the movie, so normally stay just to see all that, because there are hundreds of names in there. I've looked at the team, my team, all the Swift team, other people, they have 3 characteristics. They are smart, they are humble, and they are dedicated, and they always smile. So if you want to create a team in your institution, make sure that you hire people who smile, are humble, are smart, and are dedicated. So now, who do I want to thank? My team. Our Innotribe team. If I miss a name, yeah. Peter, Kevin, Audrey, special thanks for this beautiful marketing collateral, best ever. Tanguy, Nancy, Katie, Louise, all the Swift Institute folks, all the market teams, IT teams, standard teams, the Swift executive, the board members of Swift, our producer and facilitators, JPJ, and Collectiveness. Those two, they are suppliers in a way, they help us do that, but they've become friends because we do this for years, and each time I see them, I have the impression I saw them yesterday, so thank you very much for everything you do. So I'm going to stop here. We'll see you during the year. We have plenty of events, and we'll see you in Toronto for sure. Have a great end of Sibos, safe travel home, and just keep 3 seconds, I don't know how long that lasts, to see all the 230 plus people who made all this happen for you. Thanks, of course, to you, a marvelous audience throughout the week. Thank you very much.